I'm going to be presenting on some work that we've done on looking at various multi-stakeholder initiatives, of which the APRM is one. The other two main ones are the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, as well as the Open Government Partnership. And I think that the APRM provides a unique platform for civil society, business and government to talk about governance issues. I think we've got quite a lot of academics from universities, but I think think tanks and research institutions are also a very important part of the makeup of the intellectual capital of Africa, and a lot of us do policy work, and I think we are able to bridge that sometimes wide gap between academics who are writing for academic journals and practitioners who are trying to put this into practice. Afternoon, colleagues and friends. You'll be either disappointed or happy that I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so it will allow me to, well, it'll force you to listen or fall asleep, but I'm just going to be speaking. So what myself and my colleague Jarek Chiriansky, who unfortunately can't be here today, he'll be here at some of the meetings tomorrow, have conducted an 18-month project looking at lessons from what we've called, or what others call, multi-stakeholder initiatives. So the best way I can explain that is to say APRM is one of them, which tries to bring together governments, civil society, business to solve a key problem. And in this project, we try to examine and compare and draw lessons from three major multi-stakeholder initiatives. One is the APRM. The second is the Open Government Partnership, which started in 2011, has about 70 members from across the world, both developed and developing countries. And the third one is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI. These sorts of multi-stakeholder initiatives have emerged over the last 15 years, essentially to solve a governance problem by trying to bring stakeholders together, entrench democratic practices, and strengthen regulatory frameworks. And they operate on the premise that governance outcomes can be improved by, and people have mentioned this already, increased transparency, enhanced stakeholder participation, and policy reforms. So what we tried to do in this project is just very briefly about the methodology. We did an extensive literature review, Prof, so you'll be happy that we looked at what other people had written, and we tried to identify gaps. From that, we commissioned a number of papers to fill those gaps. We conducted interviews with the APRM Secretariat here. We also went to the OGP support unit, which is based in Washington, D.C., and the EITI Secretariat in Oslo, as well as a number of other interviews and literature searches and review by experts. And in fact, these papers were published as a set in May this year and have been launched at various venues, and if you're interested, I can certainly point you to where you can find the papers. Unfortunately, I didn't bring them with me. So we did a series of 6 papers, and I'll go briefly through the themes. The first one was, what have we learned from these multi-stakeholder initiatives, which was basically the literature review and an overview. Then I think we did some interesting comparative work, and we looked at African countries that were members of all 3 of these multi-stakeholder initiatives, and that had progressed to a certain extent in them. And the 4 countries we looked at were Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania. And it was interesting because in the middle of the research, Tanzania pulled out of the Open Government Partnership and said that it wanted to focus instead on its APRM process, and it felt it was duplicating resources and couldn't manage both. This was under the Magufuli government. I'm a strong advocate that these instruments can work together. They're like different tools in a toolbox. Sometimes one is more effective than the other. Sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver. And it's a pity that a country like Tanzania has made that decision to withdraw from the Open Government Partnership. We also did a paper. The third paper was on peer pressure and peer learning in these kinds of instruments. The fourth was on MSIs and the media. So how do they tell their story? How do they communicate with the public? The fifth paper was looking at civil society participation in the OGP, and the final paper was a summary of the lessons learned. So some of the things coming out of the literature review of the first paper, and I'm not going to go through all the papers, was that process matters. process is important, and my colleague from Tunisia was saying on national governing councils, he's found that the informal sector is not represented well enough. So, how we go through the process, how we open up dialogue and partnership between government, civil society, and the private sector is important. And those principles of promoting transparency, accountability, and good governance. It's very seldom, I think, that you'll get a good product from a poor process. So if there has not been consultation, openness, discussion in, for example, the APRM process or the OGP process, it's very unlikely actually that the product at the end of the day is going to be what was hoped for. I think one of the things that all of these instruments struggle with is documenting success, saying what has been the effect, what has actually changed because of this initiative. And in a fuzzy world of governance, it's not always easy to attribute directly this change to that policy. We can say this policy contributes to change, but to saying that it absolutely attributes, you can attribute change is always difficult. And this is one of the things I know the APRM has been conducting what it's called an impact assessment to see after 15 years what's actually changed. And sometimes I think we have a tendency to concentrate much more on outputs, so papers or conferences, rather than outcomes. Improved governance, improved livelihoods for people in Africa. And I think one of the most important findings that came up, and somebody that we interviewed said this, was that these sorts of multi-stakeholder initiatives, the APRM, the OGP, can act as accelerants. So if you know anything about starting a fire and committing arson, you know that you have your fuse, you have your source, but if you don't have petrol or something to accelerate the fire, it's going to be very small. So that's the idea of a multi-stakeholder initiative, that it can be that fire, that it can be that accelerant that enhances the fire. So looking at the second paper that looked at the MSIs in those 4 countries, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Tanzania, that these MSIs were seen as complementary, but there was a great need for improved policy harmonization and working together. A common complaint was that there was lack of capacity, resources, and a huge reporting burden that countries had in reporting on these initiatives. Generally, they found that the legislation in our countries is, with some exceptions, is solid, but again, the implementation is quite weak. And that sustained high-level political commitment is absolutely imperative for a multi-stakeholder initiative to achieve its objectives. Training is important and can be very beneficial for civil society and governments. And these MSIs should promote a race to the top. I'm not going to talk about peer learning and peer pressure. We can come back to it if there's time. But an interesting study was the one that looked at the media. And we used an international monitoring service called Meltwater between 2016 and 2017 to see how often these 3 MSIs were mentioned in the media. And looking at the global media, EITI was mentioned 7,500 times in a 1-year period, OGP 4,000 times, and the APRM just 1,600 times. Looking at the African media, EITI again won with over 2,000 mentions. OGP had 1,100 mentions, and the APRM had 700 mentions. Now, you can't always take much store in that, but it does seem that the APRM is lagging a little bit behind in getting its message out. Web presence and social media presence are extremely important in igniting the conversation, using languages that are widely spoken by people, and the main conclusion of that paper was that multi-stakeholder initiatives will not capture the public imagination unless they can demonstrate the success of their endeavors in the real world. Lack of real-world reforms that can be attributable to these MSIs is largely responsible for the poor media coverage that they actually receive. I'm going to skip to the lessons learned summary, and what we found was that countries join multi-stakeholder initiatives for different reasons. For some, it's a genuine desire to reform. For others, it's about shoring up domestic legitimacy. Sometimes it's for foreign policy reasons. Sometimes it's pressure from donors or pressure from citizens, and sometimes it's a status symbol. Again, I think these MSIs have struggled to prove that they really make a difference. Is the millions of dollars that we pour into the OGP or the APRM really making a difference? And if we can't answer that question, we should probably shut up shop and go and enjoy the wonderful Johannesburg sunshine outside. In some countries, anecdotal evidence points to the opening up of political space, including avenues, opportunities, and entry points for civil society organizations. I think what's very important is which government agency drives the particular multi-stakeholder initiative in question. So sometimes if it's in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's much more outward looking, whereas sometimes if it's, say, in the Ministry of Planning, where Sylvia works, I think one can argue that Uganda's had one of the most effective APRM processes because of the situation of the APRM infrastructure within the Ministry of Planning. It's also important to adapt to a changing international and national environment. But without broader public support, without people knowing what these initiatives are and supporting them and understanding them, they are going to continue to struggle, and they're going to continue to be of interest to people like us sitting in this room, but not so much to the people out there. I haven't been given my 3-minute warning, so I'm going to take a little bit of time on the final slide which I had, which was on lessons that I thought we could draw from the other MSIs, particularly for the APRM. The first, and this is something that I've been complaining about for a long time, is that the website of the institution has to be user-friendly, has to be comprehensive, it has to be a knowledge repository with country pages, with specific documents. With respect, if you've tried to navigate the APRM website, it's very difficult. It's very hard to find a comprehensive collection of everything that one is looking for, even though it's gone through many revisions. Secondly, I think what would be very beneficial is if a civil society desk or responsibility was set up at the APRM Secretariat. The other two MSIs have this structure, and it's extremely important. It's great to hear from when people were introducing themselves that there's so many people from national governing councils. And I think that's very important, and that's certainly something that we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, that NGCs have become much more involved in the APRM. But what I would like is a central place at the Secretariat where an NGO in Ghana or an NGO in the Gambia or an NGO in Mozambique can say, we have this issue, or we'd like to bring this particular issue to your attention, or we would like to be more involved in our national process, or we see a problem in our national process, or how do you help us get civil society excited about the APRM, that there's a central point at the Secretariat that has that responsibility. I can see my warning is coming up. I have 3 more points. I think it's important to elevate the oversight role of civil society in this process, including making it easier for civil society organizations to attend the APRM forum, for example, the meeting of the heads of state, not as a participant, but at least as an observer, and other high-level meetings. We really need to improve on our peer learning on identified best practices. I think some of the other MSIs are a little better and a bit more systematic at doing that. And I think what I'll end on is the last 2 points, that we need to be tougher on the members of these multi-stakeholder initiatives that close civic space. So you will see that APRM's been very reluctant and reticent to call out members where that civic space has been closing for civil society to participate, where national programs of action are not being implemented, where reports are not delivered timeously, and when our members don't pay fees. I think we're soft on our members. And finally, I think we need to produce clear, understandable, impactful research on the evidence, with evidence of the APRM's impact in the world and how it has changed our continent over the last 15 years, and hopefully what it will do for the next 50. I'm done. Thank you. Thank Thank you. I'm Stephen Gruzd. I work at the South African Institute of International Affairs, SIA, in Johannesburg, and we do a lot of work on international affairs, and personally I've been involved in really examining the APRM from all angles for the last 16 years. We do a lot of work around the continent, mainly with civil society, in telling them about the APRM and the opportunities that it presents for them to improve governance in their countries. So I'm going to be presenting on some work that we've done on looking at various multi-stakeholder initiatives, of which the APRM is one. The other two main ones are the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, as well as the Open Government Partnership. And we looked over an 18-month period at these three institutions, how they played out in various countries. I think there are a lot of lessons that the APRM can both teach to these other institutions, but also learn from them. One of them is the importance of good communication, of a good, usable website, and also considering having independent reviews of the reports that countries put in on their implementation of their programs of action. So I think the APRM is an important tool. It's great that countries are still joining. We haven't got all the countries of Africa yet as members, but Botswana, for example, has indicated that it wants to join, which is great news. And I think that the APRM provides a unique platform for civil society, business, and government to talk about governance issues in ways that are sometimes not possible or not encouraged in countries. And so I think it's a wonderful tool that really can open up the conversation about how the lives of people are made better. So I'd like to put in a plug here for think tanks. I think we've got quite a lot of academics from universities, but I think think tanks and research institutions are also a very important part of the makeup of the intellectual capital of Africa, and a lot of us do policy work, and I think we are able to bridge that sometimes wide gap between academics who are writing for academic journals and practitioners who are trying to put this into practice. So I think more can be done in encouraging think tanks around the continent to work more closely with the Secretariat and with other academics to really explore how governance can be made better, and by that, how development and people's lives can be made better on the continent.